things they like most to forget is the misery index. Now, some of you young people are too young to remember that, but in the 1976 campaign, 8 years ago, they figured out a gimmick. They added up the rate of inflation and the rate of unemployment, and the total was the misery index. And at that time, in 76, it was 12.6. And they declared that the incumbent, Jerry Ford, had no right to seek re-election with that kind of a misery index. Well, 4 years later, along came the 1980 campaign. They never mentioned the misery index. And I don't think my opponent will mention it in this campaign. Possibly because it was over 20 when he left the vice presidency, and it's only 11.6 now. My opponent has done a very good job of slipping, sliding, and ducking away from his record. But here in Ohio, during the primaries, Senator Gary Hart got his message through by reminding you, the Ohio voters, of the true record. And I quote, he said, Walter Mondale may pledge stable prices, but Carter Mondale could not cure 12% inflation. Walter Mondale, he added, has come to Ohio to talk about jobs, but Carter Mondale watched helpless as 180,000 Ohio jobs disappeared in the period between 1976 and 1980. Now, I didn't say that. Those are Gary Hart's words. Those disastrous consequences didn't come about by accident. They came through the implementation of the very policies of out-of-control spending, unfair taxation, and worship of big government that my opponent still supports. His philosophy can be summed up in 4 sentences. If it's income, tax it. If it's revenue, spend it. If it's a budget, break it. And if it's a promise, make it. All this year, he has lavished his campaign with promises that staggered even his Democratic opponents. Ohio's own Senator Glenn was heard to say in frustration that Mr. Mondale, and I quote, has just promised everything to everybody with no thought of how it's going to be paid for. And then again, Gary Hart responded and said, Fritz, you cannot lead this country if you've promised everybody everything. But of course, there's a predictable answer by one who makes so many promises. That answer is higher taxes. And massive new tax increases are precisely what he proposes. A few weeks back, he called his new plan pay as you go. Well, what it is, of course, is nothing but the old plan. You pay and he goes. Those tax increases to pay for his promises add up to the equivalent of $1,890 per household. If Harry Truman had to apply a motto to his radical taxing scheme, he would have to say that, you know that famous line, the buck stops here. He would say this time, your buck never stops. When the centerpiece of his economic program is back-breaking tax hikes, you can see why he spends so much time using outrageous scare tactics. Now that's not my opponent's only tax extravaganza. He came up with still another one in our debate. He said, and I quote, as soon as we get the economy on a sound ground as well, I would like to see the total repeal of indexing. Now this tax is even worse because it would be a dagger at the heart of every low and middle income taxpayer in America. It would mean bone-crushing new levies against those who can least afford them. Indexing was a reform that we passed to protect you from the cruelest of taxes, the hidden tax, when government uses inflation to force you into higher tax brackets just because you've gotten a cost of living pay raise. And under the Mondale plan, here's what would happen to a family struggling on $10,000 a year. By 1989, they would be paying over 73% more in income taxes if indexing, which begins on January 1st, is canceled. For families making $30,000 a year, the tax would take over $500 more in '89, nearly $900 a year more if someone was making $40,000. These assume modest inflation. If we had this higher double-digit tax inflation rates back, the kind that they had, then all those tax collections would more than double what I just told you. Now we're told since Sunday night that he misspoke, that he actually meant to just say the opposite. But on several occasions since 1982, he has expressly proposed the repeal of indexing. And he's done this quite often. You know, in politics, they call that a flip-flop. In this case, you'll forgive me if I call it a Fritz-flop. Yesterday, he wanted to give a $200 tax break to every family dependent, and today he wants to raise taxes the equivalent of $1,890 per household. You know, for some time, for the last several days at least, he was talking about a new Reagan and an old Reagan. Now, that had nothing to do with my age. The old Reagan was the first one. The new Reagan is now. And what he said that, well, he inspired me to do a little of that old and new business. The old Mondale is on record as saying that the budget and reducing deficits could worsen a recession. The new Mondale thinks higher taxes lead to a healthy economy. The old Mondale publicly supported Jimmy Carter's wrong-headed grain embargo. The new Mondale claims that he opposed it privately, very privately. The old Mondale sponsored National Bible Week in the U.S. Senate. I'm for that. The new Mondale says there's too much religion in politics. The old Mondale called the space shuttle a horrible waste, a space extravaganza, and he personally led the fight in the United States Senate to kill the shuttle program. The new Mondale praises American technological achievement. I had the privilege just a little while ago from the train of calling those people that are up there going around the earth right now while I'm riding on the train, those wonderful heroes of ours. But just when you're beginning to lose faith, however, you find that there is some constancy. The old Mondale increased your taxes, and the new Mondale will do it again. You know, in our debate, I got a little angry all those times that he distorted my record. And on one occasion, I was about to say to him very sternly, Mr. Mondale, you're taxing my patience. Then I caught myself. Why should I give him another idea? That's the only tax he hasn't thought of. But from now until November 6th, we're going to make sure the American people know about this choice on which their future depends. Incidentally, when I was in school, I learned that 30 days, that's September, April, June, and November. Now I happen to realize that November only has 6 days.